This mock interview will show you what a data science interview is like. Keith Galley is an experienced data scientist and interviewer, and in this video he interviews Kylie Ying. Kylie has taught multiple machine learning courses on our channel. This is a great video for anyone currently in the job market for a data-focused role. It's also a solid video for anyone who wants a better understanding of the machine learning process. They cover topics that include building a dataset for training, testing purposes, feature vectorization, and model implementation details. Consider pausing after the questions and thinking about how you would answer them.
Hey, what is up everyone, and welcome back to another video. In it, I'm going to conduct a full-length data science interview. I think that this video is great for any of you that are in the process of applying to a data science or data analytics role and want to get a sense of what a strong interview looks like. Even if you're not actively applying for a role, I think that this video is also great for anyone that wants to build a better intuition of the data science process and the steps involved in creating machine learning models. In this video, I will be interviewing Kylie Ying. Kylie is a fellow tech YouTuber who makes content on topics that include programming projects, Python tutorials, and lifestyle vlogging. Kylie has both her bachelor's and master's degrees from MIT, and she has a track record of success in the interview process, receiving offers from top-tier companies such as Meta. The format of the video will be roughly a 45 to 60-minute technical interview, followed by a breakdown of how that interview went, where both Kylie will be giving me feedback as the interviewer, as well as I'll be giving her feedback as the interviewee. Some important context: I have conducted dozens of interviews when I was a part of the founding team of Posh Technologies, from roughly the size of just 5 people to all the way till we were just under 40 people. I participated in most interviews, so I've seen the good, I've also seen the bad. The questions that we walk through in this video are an adaptation of the style that we used in one of our interviews for data science candidates at Posh, so I try to make it as real world as possible. Welcome. How's it going today?
It's good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Weather's not been too bad, so I can't really complain. Exciting to meet you. Exciting that you're interviewing for this team.
Great to meet you too.
We've been looking for someone to fill this role for the past couple weeks, and I know excited by your resume and just excited to learn more about you and kind of walk you through the task that we'll be solving today. So I guess to start off, I'm curious. I read your resume, but just tell me a little bit more about yourself and I guess what you're looking for in your next opportunity, your next role.
Yeah, so I finished my master's and undergrad from MIT. I was doing a lot of electrical engineering, computer science, along with physics. And in my next role, I'm just looking for something more quantitative, something intellectually stimulating, and just somewhere I can learn a lot. So I saw this job and I thought I'd apply because based on the job description, it just sounded like everything that I wanted, Yeah,
definitely. And honestly, from my experience, we have a really hardworking team. We're working on hard problems, exciting problems. So definitely fits that category. I guess just to break into that a little bit more, what you just said a lot of things: computer science, electrical engineering, and physics. I guess what made you kind of study all of these things? I guess what excited you about just that, spread?
I think with so I really think that with EE and CS, it was because I wanted to, I had this super, I was very interested in AI and robotics, and I just really wanted to be able to just someday create Jarvis, to have the tools to create Jarvis, and which, by the way, is Tony Stark's superhuman AI. And so I thought, with computer science, I would be able to have the programming, the AI part of that, but then also with EE, I would be able to literally build the Iron Man suit, which would be pretty cool. And then with physics, I think it's just, I've always been really curious about the evolution of the universe, what's out there, black holes, the galaxies, stars, all of that good stuff. And so when I took a relativity course, it just really blew my mind that there are all these things that you don't even know that are out there, right? Light bends around stars because of gravity. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's fascinating, like, especially exploring outside of my realm. I don't have that physics experience. I don't have that kind of, space exploration, all of that fun stuff experience, but I am fascinated by it as well. And also, fun fact, I'm sure you're aware, but Tony Stark was also an MIT grad, so you're in good company there.
Why I wanted to go to MIT.
Smart. Okay, so I guess before we get into like kind of the real bulk of this interview, I mean, I think you kind of hit on it a bit with that, but I'm curious to just dig into this a bit more. So, I mean, in the past year or two, even just really like past like 6 months, there's been a ton of developments in the artificial intelligence, machine learning space. I'm just curious if there's anything that kind of sticks out to you that you're particularly excited about, and if so, like what that is and what excites you about that.
Yeah, so I definitely think that what everyone's talking about right now is like ChatGPT, right? Because it's super disruptive. Everybody's like Googling how to write their essays or how to code up this, something script, which is awesome. But I would say that, this AI stuff, I mean, I'm super interested in it, but more specifically, I think I'm really interested in reinforcement learning and just getting a computer to beat humans at certain things, or robotics in the sense of like self-driving cars. I think that's really interesting, being able to teach a robot how to interact and basically do what a human would do. Also things like superhuman chess AIs or superhuman poker AIs. I think that's all really cool because it's beating humans at a game that you would think is only for humans. Like poker is built on psychology, math, and randomness. You would never expect there to be this like Nash equilibrium, like optimum solution, right? But there is, which is really cool.
Yeah, it gets really, really interesting when you combine the psychology element of the human experience with machines, with AI. And I think that from my experience, that's something that's often overlooked, and it kind of bothers me that it's overlooked because it's so important to the concept of artificial intelligence if it's going to be that intelligent. So yeah, definitely, I think those things are super exciting. Awesome. Let's switch gears, and I guess to give you a little bit of context, my name is Keith Callie. I'm a senior data scientist here on the team. The question that we're going to kind of present is something that we're actively looking at here. So this is kind of the task right now. So you're working as a data scientist on the team here at Twitter. Our CEO, Mr. Elon Musk, has been complaining a lot recently, and we're a social media site, maybe similar to something that you might be aware of. But our CEO has been complaining a lot recently about the serious bot issue that's kind of infiltrated our site, or he kind of has mentioned has infiltrated our site and become a serious issue that we want to look at, we want to mitigate and solve. So some things that these bots are causing some issues are they're quickly responding. When our CEO posts, and within a minute there's hundreds of replies promoting some sort of site, some sort of program, some sort of money scheme. So there's bots that are doing these quick postings. There's coordinated bots that are all over the the ecosystem that are sharing propagandist messages and sharing fake news messages. So that's a little bit of context, I guess. Before I dive into some of the specific kind of guided questions, does that make sense? What I kind of presented? And I guess first off, a question to you, just kind of this is not really a data science question, but do you have any thoughts on other issues bots on this social media site might cause, and things that we should be thinking about when we're investigating this issue?
Yeah, so I definitely think that obviously bots are annoying, right? Like nobody wants to be tagged in a million things. Nobody wants their entire notifications to just be bots spamming them, right? And I also think that bots take away from the real conversations that might happen on this platform. So to reiterate, your question is, I guess the current issue that you're trying to solve is that there are all these bot attacks, and immediately after posting, things get really crowded with these coordinated messages and spam messages, and you're asking like what else?
Yeah, this is an exploratory question. I'm just curious, and it's not really data science, it's more platform driven. I'm just curious,
right.
Pick your brain and see if you have any other ideas of like potential issues with having serious, bot issues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think that it I think bots are there to target a specific group, right? Like all these money-making schemes, like do you really think that they're making money, or is it just trying to scam people? And like I know that especially in a lot of the crypto world, there's a lot of bots that might just be links to these fraudulent sites, which end up draining your wallets or stealing your NFTs, or I don't know, all these different malicious schemes. And so that's definitely one reason why like bots are bad, right? Because it's not just that it's crowding things, it's also that your users are literally being the ones scammed off of, and that does not create a good reputation for your company.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. And, obviously that's what we're trying to avoid. So also, I'm going to get into more guided questions, but also like, given this context and just, your background as a data scientist, do you have any initial thoughts about the problem? Anything that immediately sticks out, like that you would want to investigate about, just this high level, I guess, issue? And we'll dive into, guided stuff, but I just kind of also want to just gauge your high level, thoughts on the situation.
By like thoughts on the situation, do you mean just like what my first thoughts are on how I would tackle this problem?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I definitely think that with these bots, you mentioned a few different things, right? That it's coordinated, that it seems like they're filling up immediately after a post has been posted. It seems like there might be links to certain things or certain themes that the attacks are always about. And so I would start maybe investigating a bunch of these things and trying to figure out certain features of these attacks or these spam messages that might be able to, for us with certainty, say whether or not this is a spam bot attack.
Yeah.
And I also think that, there are certain other attributes, such as if they tag a ton of people, right? Or if a single account posts multiple times, or maybe the account follows a ton of people, but nobody follows them. I think these could all be certain traits of a spam bot. And when you have multiple of these things in conjunction with one another, then that strengthens the case that this might be, spam. So I think that those are all different things to consider, and maybe we can train a model based off of that to classify whether or not a message is spam.
Awesome. Yeah. And you're kind of, I guess, getting ahead of even what I was, planning on asking next, but this is exactly kind of where the discussion is going. And I think, I think because you've already kind of hit on some of these points, I think maybe it would be nice to kind of drill down a bit more on, some of these features that we're talking about here. So what I'm going to do, just because I think it's helpful for both, myself as the interviewer as well as you, brainstorming and thinking about these things. I'm going to share a Google Doc, and let's try to get some of this on paper, and we might drill into some of these a bit further, and then I'm going to kind of ask some additional questions about this process, and we can dive into those aspects further. So
sounds great.
I will share it just through the Zoom. One sec. The Zoom chat.
Sweet.
Oh no. Is that, can you see the screen? Yep.
Not on Zoom anymore.
Oh, not on Zoom? Interesting.
It's like a really thin line right now. Oh yeah, there we go.
Let's try that again. I think it's because I switched where it was on the
Okay.
the screen. I have two screens open. I switch the screen. You know how it is. So can you see that on Zoom?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so I guess let's just start off. Hello as well. I'm going to delete that quickly. What are some features we should investigate? So I labeled the question as what are some features we should investigate. You can kind of interpret that as you will. Just basically, let's just drill down and just get some bullet points maybe of some of the things you just mentioned, just because I think that'll be helpful for reference throughout.
Yeah. So I definitely think that when you look at some bot attacks, I think that there's probably a few main things to look at, but the two that stand out to me are the content of the specific post. So content of the post, and then as well as the person or the account that's actually making the post. So I think in terms of content of the post, these are things such as how many people do they tag? How many tags? Or for example, timing of the post or words mentioned in the post. What are other things? Maybe links, maybe images. Let's see, what else? When I make a post, I type something, send it out, maybe tag. By tags I mean accounts tagged, but also I think like keyword tags could also be another thing to look at.
Okay, so like hashtags versus accounts tags.
Yeah,
ads
sorry.
versus, that makes sense.
Yeah, hashtags. So I think that covers a lot of like what would be in a post. And then the account making the post, we might want to see like how many followers they have. Maybe the number of accounts following or followed. So followers and following. And I think maybe like looking at a ratio between that might be a good idea as well.
Say that one more time. I missed that.
Maybe like the ratio between like the number of accounts that they follow and then how many followers they actually have. I also think that if you want to look at the followers, maybe who the followers are, because for example, if we've already labeled a few accounts as specific spam accounts, then if one account's followers are completely spam accounts that we've already labeled, then it's very likely that that account itself is a spam account, right? So are the followers spam accounts? And something else could be like the types of posts that they make, like how repetitive are the posts that they make. So if the account is posting the same thing every time, like, hey, check out my YouTube video, and the same link every single time, then it's likely that that's spam, right? Content of account posts. And I think one more thing to consider could be like for the content of the post and the account, so I do think that you guys have probably a report spam feature, correct?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so I would say something that we could do is how many times has it been reported spam? Or like how many times has something similar been reported spam? But I do think that is a big indication in terms of both the content and the account itself.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is definitely a good starting list. Anything else that you can think of, and maybe kind of think a bit outside the box here? It doesn't necessarily have to be outside the box, but I guess one thing that I immediately see is that all these things are very publicly facing. I'm just wondering too, being the system administrators here, is there anything else maybe on a more internal level that we might be able to factor in on the bots?
Yeah, so I do think that one internal thing would be like this reported spam thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I also think maybe another could be, you mentioned earlier that there were these coordinated attacks. So I think if you see like if you see a spike in the number of posts being posted within like a 5-minute interval or something like that, and the content of all these posts is somewhat similar, like document distance is somewhat similar or something, then perhaps those would all be, that could be like a coordinated attack, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So like similarity in amount of posts. So if you just see this massive spike, then basically that might be some sort of indicator. So somehow to capture that spike as one of
so
these
maybe
features.
So maybe I'll add like a separate category and and this could be like aggregated action or aggregated things. So maybe one of them could just be similarity of posts in small time frame. Something else that Twitter might have access to, or the platform might have access to. Okay, let's see. I have so things that are private to an audience but are public to internal Twitter might be the emails, even email addresses of the account.
Yeah.
So that could go under the account making the post. So like email address. I don't know whether or not you require all these emails to be verified, but maybe if it's not a common domain, or maybe if like there's a lot of random letters in the email, like the prefix, then those could all point to more spam-like. And I think that this could be a little bit tricky because, back in the 2000s, we all made like really dumb email addresses, right? So I think that this could get a little tricky, but I definitely think that there are indications of whether or not something is more spam-like.
Definitely. And I think that you made a really good point there with domain name. Just, for context here too, you're more likely to be able to trust a Gmail address maybe than a random address you've never heard of. So like some sort of weighting scheme could be interesting here.
Right.
I guess an aside.
The reason why I was kind of like hesitant about that as well was because, like, for example, you might have your own domain name, right?
Yeah.
Like geethcali.com or something like that. And so your email might be like info at this like custom domain name, in which case we would want to make sure that people using that email address, that does not get caught up in this like spam filter and filtered too harshly that just because of the email, it's considered spam.
Yeah, I think the way that I would look at it, and I think that you're kind of hitting on this, is that it could be I think a good domain address could be an indicator of like a valid account, whereas maybe a bad one doesn't say that much. I think that's kind of the point you're making. Interesting thing just to note about Gmail, just because I've been through this experience, Gmail very much limits the amount of accounts that you can make for a certain IP address. So that definitely would help, capture some positive emails, because they could only make so many easily. Cool. I think this is a great list. I think the only other things I might add here is just like post engagement. But I think this kind of encapsulated in a lot of the other stuff, like, post engagement, likes, retweets, all of that, or as well as looking at the details of who is liking these things. If it, as you mentioned with the followers, if it's always the same spam accounts that we've identified previously, probably not good engagement, not organic engagement. So I think this is a great list for this portion. I think we can kind of move on to some of the other questions about the task, but we'll keep this here for reference. So I'm going to go and scroll down a bit on this post. The next thing I want to discuss, and you can maybe start jotting up some thoughts on this, is like, okay, we have all this idea of what we're looking for. I mean, a big portion of building, let's say our goal as a team was to build a model that could identify and potentially remove these bots. A big portion in training that model is having a data set to work with. So I think thinking about the concept of a data set here, what might that data set look like, and how would we go about one second, let me just write this out as I speak it out.
Yeah.
And then how would you approach collecting, I guess, that data? So kind of an open-ended question, but I think it's a good one to start discussing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess to first answer this question, I would kind of look at this first part of this question, like what would a data set to train models look like? Okay, well, so what exactly are the models that we're trying to train, right? And I think that, of a lot of the models out there, I think many of them would look very similar. And I think that specifically, we want some sort of feature vector to be able to feed into these models. And that feature vector, well, it should probably summarize all the things that we just mentioned above, right? So I think in terms of, I think this question also comes down to, are we trying to tag the post specifically? Like, do we have a model that are detecting spam posts or spam accounts? And those are two different questions that we're trying to ask, right?
Yeah.
So actually, which
I would say in the context of this question, what I was thinking about was I think that it's good to think about both, because one model probably wouldn't work for the other use case. But I was thinking specifically about bot accounts and trying to detect those bot accounts, and then what the data set might look like to help train the model to predict and detect unknown accounts.
Okay. So if we're trying to specifically target these accounts, then I might focus on more of the attributes of the account making the post that we had listed above. So the bullet points under that are such as number of followers, number of accounts that follow them. So accounts, and then are the followers also spam accounts? Maybe the content of the account. So maybe we can look at the last few posts. How many times this account has been reported spam, the email address of that account. And I think that the most basic thing that we can do is just feed everything into kind of a neural net, right? I'm gonna leave this. So for certain attributes, I won't mention them yet, but like a feature vector for that might look like number of followers, number accounts, or I guess number following. That would be a better way to describe it. Those are very black and white numbers, right? So there's no question about whether or not we can feed that into a neural net or some other model. Now this next question, are the followers spam accounts? So that's kind of this like almost circular logic. So I will maybe leave that off for now. The content of the account, I will come back to that. And then how many times it's reported spam. So number of spam reports on this specific account. And then the email address. Okay. So I think that this is a good start, but obviously it's not enough. So let's talk about let's go with the email address first. So the thing is, in here, I would want to maybe, sorry, letting the sirens pass. Can you hear it anymore?
I can't hear it before at all.
Oh, really?
I never heard sirens.
Wow. Oh, okay. So right now we have 3 different things: the number of followers, number of following, and then the number of the spam reports. But I also think that maybe there's some value that we can assign to the email address of whether or not it's more spam-like or whether or not it's safer, right?
And what I'm maybe you're going to get into this, but what might like a simple or
Right.
a model for that look like?
Right. So I think that, okay, so a very basic model could just be you have all these domain names that like of that are popular, that are common out there. And we would want to get, many different countries and not just what's popular here in the US. But suppose you have a bunch of like domain names that are popular, then this could be a very simple like 10, like whether or not it has that opposite of prefix, that like domain name in the email address, right? So like 1 for at Gmail. Oh, okay, wait. Oh, you can't see that. Okay, but anyway, 1 for gmail.com, hotmail.com, yahoo.com, etc. Right? And then 0 otherwise.
Yep.
So that would be a very basic value for email. Now, to get into things that are maybe something a little bit more complicated, we could even train a classifier on just emails. Right?
Yep.
If we had an entire data set of emails that are good and bad, that are not spam and spam, we could train a classifier on that, which would spit out a probability, which would spit out a probability of how likely it is to be spam or not spam. And so maybe certain attributes of that email address could be in fact this domain name. So maybe we have some sort of one-hot encoding system for these. So one-hot encoded domain name. And then maybe...
Can you just quickly explain what a one-hot encoded domain name, what that would look like? I just want to clarify.
Yeah. So let's say that... So basically in one-hot encoding, you are using 0s and 1s to encode a certain value. And so by that, what I mean is, let's just take these 3, Gmail, Hotmail, and Yahoo, and put them into like a list like this, right? So position 1 would be Gmail, position 2 is Hotmail, and position 3 is Yahoo. So a one-hot encoding for this, for like something at gmail.com, this email address would then be encoded as 100. Then maybe something at hotmail.com would be 010, and then something at yahoo.com would be 001. Now, if I had something at random.abc, then this would actually get encoded to 000.
Got it.
But basically what one-hot encoding is doing is it's trying to assign a numerical value to something that is not numerical, because our computers are very good at understanding numerical values, right? It's trying to assign something numerical to something that is not, and it's trying to make it so there's no association with one another. So something that you might be asking is, why can't we do 1, 2, 3, 4 and just call that a day, right? That's because this is telling us, okay, 1 is closer to 2 numerically than it is to 3. But it shouldn't matter in our case, because Gmail should not be closer to Yahoo than Hotmail is to Yahoo, right? They're just different categories. They're not more similar or less similar. So that's why we're using this one-hot encoding.
Got it. Cool.
And something else that we could do. So I do want to use like the characters in the email itself.
Yeah.
For this classifier. I'm trying to think of like how I would do that. I might. Well, so I do think that if there's a name or a word in the email, it's probably more likely to not be spam.
Yep.
Right. So I think that maybe like having a list of common names and common words.
Yep.
That we could check that against. So that could just be like a 0-1 binary encoding for whether or not common names or words appear in email. And I think this one's also kind of tricky because I do think that you have to consider different languages, right? And so this would be something to think about if we were actually building this model, is like we would need to think about the different languages and different names in different languages and stuff like that. So for now, what I might do is just this simple encoding scheme where we just get a bunch of common address domains and then 0 or 1 for that. I think that would suffice for now.
Yep.
Now, in terms of this, now let's go back to this like content that the account is posting. So I do think it makes sense to not scrape the entire like post history of the account, because I think that might be excessive. Like I think if it's a true spam account, then like the first 5 or 10 should suffice, right? So I think what we could do is in here have certain features for like post number 1, post number 2, etc. to post number, let's say we do 10.
Yep.
And now scrolling down a little bit, let me indent all of this.
Why did it make a bullet list? Or was it a bullet list? I guess some of it was.
No, but I
made it.
I did that.
Nice.
Yeah. Just for organization.
Yeah, I appreciate organization.
Yeah. Here. So this is basic encoding scheme.
Yep.
Something more complex would be this.
Yep.
Okay, so now let's think about the posts. So with the posts, that would be a lot of this stuff from up here, which I'm just going to copy and paste down here. Okay, so the first one could be accounts tag. Okay, what are the simple ones? The simple ones are things such as how many times, number of spam reports for that specific post.
Yep.
Maybe, okay, the timing of posts. I think that can be easily converted to like an epoch value or something. And the only reason why I want to consider the timing of the post is because if, for example, the last 10 posts were posted within like 1 second of each other, that probably indicates a spam bot, right? So that's the only reason why I want to consider this timing. And I think that it would make sense to maybe use some sort of integer representation. So maybe like seconds or milliseconds since epoch. Like, so yeah. And then next I would think about,
and just because, you know, with our team, we have to communicate these things to, you know, business stakeholders that sometimes don't understand some of these details. Could you just kind of very, I guess, simple terms, what does it mean milliseconds since epoch?
It literally means number of milliseconds since, like, I think it's January 1st at midnight in 1970 or something like that. But you can think of it as literally just like number of seconds or number of milliseconds since a certain time period, like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically discretizing time such that we can measure it as an integer.
Yep.
Okay, so then next, I think we have to think about all these tags and the content in the post, right? I do think that one easy thing to do could be, like, for the words mentioned in the post, to have some sort of, again, like one-hot encoding for very common spam words.
Yep.
So, such as like claim, free, can't think of all the ones off the top of my head, but yeah.
Get, yeah.
I'm not a spam bot.
Yeah.
But
that's good. That's good. We're not hiring spam bots right now, so.
Yeah. So maybe like a one-hot encoding of common spam words.
Cool.
And I think that maybe this could also be similar for like the hashtags as well. But I think that this could encompass the hashtags, right? Because if we're just looking for whether or not these words appear in the entire string of words, then like that would cover the hashtags as well.
Cool. And I think honestly, I'm just looking at the time here. I do want to kind of switch gears a bit. I think this is a good, high-level description of an implementation. I do want to just ask some kind of follow-up questions to these things.
Yeah.
So I guess just circling back first, I think that really you dove into the details of implementation. I think that this is a solid approach using this feature vectorization approach, and kind of, I think you did a good job explaining some of these details. But I do want to revisit kind of the one of the initial questions, which was, we have this way of building this model with these feature vectors, but at the end of the day, we need to train these models, and we need a data set to train these on. So I guess I just really want to drill down specifically on that, like what would the data set that we need to use this approach maybe look like? And just any, I guess, thoughts on that. And I'm going to just break this apart real quick and just say implementation approach or something like that, just to separate it a little bit visually. Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah. So you're just asking, like, how would I collect that data?
Yeah.
The data that I just described.
Well.
Yeah. So
I guess what I'm thinking about is the data you just described. I think is fairly straightforward to collect. But at the end of the day, we need I guess the two questions I want to drill down on is what makes an account a human, and what makes an account a bot. Like, how do you, I guess, get data on bot accounts and maybe human accounts? Like, because at the end of the day, we need that to make this a meaningful model.
Right. So I do think that, so at the end of the day, who is the person who can distinguish the bots, right? It's humans. It's humans, because when we get annoyed at seeing spam or something like that, like that's what literally makes this a spam post. It's when some human it decides, I don't want to see this content and this is spam. So I actually think that one of these things that I kept mentioning, which was how many times has this been reported spam, I actually think that could be our label, right? For whether or not the account is spam or not.
Yeah.
So this is how we can label spam. Because at the end of the day, this is a classification problem. It's is it spam or is it not spam? And what our data is collecting is we're collecting all of these features, but then we need a label for that feature, right?
Yep.
And that label, we want two different categories. Is it spam or is it not spam?
Yep.
And obviously, the more times something has been reported spam, the more likely it is to be under category 1.
Yep.
Right? So I think one of the most basic ways to do this could just be, if it's reported spam over blank number of times, then make that then label that as spam. So naive labeling system could be if it's reported spam X number of times, then label spam. And this X, this is really up to like what you're, like how much data do you want to collect, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't really want to kind of fake that data because, you know, as I was trying to come up with these things down here, it's pretty hard to fake being spam if you're not spam yourself.
Yeah.
And then for the non-spam, I would just do like if no reports of spam, then label as not spam. And also I think that these no reports and this report spam, like I think that you should put some sort of time frame on this. So like since account creation for longer than a week or something like that, if it's never been reported spam or if it has been reported spam, then I think that can give you a good indication. Or maybe not a week. You would have to set the threshold, right?
Yeah.
But you don't want like a brand new account to be part of this system.
Definitely makes sense. Okay, I think this makes sense as a naive labeling system. You know, my big concern is like, I guess, what are the problems potentially with this approach? Like, you know, how could we build this, make this more robust? I guess either, you know, maybe identify what could potentially be a problem here, or potentially just mention an idea or two about how could we make this more robust.
Yeah, so I definitely think that this is relying a lot on user feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's relying a lot on whether or not somebody has reported something as spam.
Yeah.
I do think, like, I mean, okay, so one slow but sure way that you could label certain things as spam or not spam is that you could just have like you could just hire people to go through different posts and different accounts and say, oh, this one is spam, like we should use this as a spam account to model after, or to include in our data set, sorry. But that would then be also kind of tedious, slow. You would have to pay more just to collect data that you already have. Another system might be, sorry, let me think for a second.
No problem.
So I do think that this this reporting spam is a good indication because it's similar to how like Waze works.
Yeah.
Right? How like, oh, is there... Well, okay, one thing that you could do is you could just implement something that makes it more incentivized for a user to correctly label things as spam or not. So, for example, you could have an easier system of reporting spam, or you could have literally a direct question of whether or not something is spam or not.
Yeah.
Because I do think user feedback is probably one of the most important, because after all, you're building a product for your users, right?
Yeah.
And like their feedback, their classification of whether or not something is spam or not, that's going to be what's important. So maybe like if there's some, like maybe we can start tracking some of these things and just coming up with something naive, like things that are obvious as spam accounts. If those specific attributes pop up, then we could automatically just be like, oh, do we think that this would be spam? Like you could have a poll that presents to the user that would make it easier to label as spam or not.
Yeah. I think that suffices. That kind of answers my question. I think the only details that I would add from my end here is that you got to keep in mind that there's a lot of trolls on social media, a lot of people that are bad actors, and when we're designing a system like this, we need to keep that in mind. There might be targeted attacks, people labeling someone they don't like as spam.
Right.
So we also need to factor that in. And so that would be one component I would add here. Right. Another thing I would just quickly mention too is I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to do a little bit of human annotation. I think a lot of tasks sometimes require that. I think the important thing is we want to cross-reference our annotations because we might be paying a group, we might not be monitoring them super closely, so we want to make sure that they are not just ticking a random box. So, something to think about there.
Right.
Cool.
Well, I also do want to add one more thing to this is like maybe your threshold should not be like number of times, but maybe it should be like ratio of like spam reports to engagement or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Because even if there are many bad actors, I do think that most people would act the way that you would think that they act. So I think like there probably aren't more than like 10 or 20% like people who would deviate from that expectation. So for example, if like I think that's the importance of this threshold, right? That's the importance of saying, well, how strict do I want to be such that like do I want the stricter I am with this threshold, the more confident I am that this has to be spam.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the importance of this labeling system is how strict do you want to be? Because the stricter you are, the less data you have to train on is another consideration.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And I think that ratio idea is an interesting idea. And the only really way to know is to actually try this out, test it. So it's hard to know with certainty, but I think the important thing is having these different ideas that are worth playing around with and attempting.
Okay.
I'm going to ask one, just because we're running up on time, I'm going to ask, I think, maybe just one last question on this problem. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. You don't have to use the document anymore. We can kind of just chat about this. I'm just, from let's start thinking a little bit more about implementation of this. Thinking about Python and maybe the larger cloud ecosystem, like, do you kind of have a high level feel of how you might approach the actual technical implementation of, building this model? Or anything that comes to mind, so maybe certain libraries, certain frameworks, certain just like cloud resources, et cetera. I'm just curious, from a implementation standpoint, anything that kind of sticks out that you'd probably do from an approach.
Yeah, so I would definitely say I'm probably the most familiar with like TensorFlow. So a lot of how I would be modeling this is I would probably start with my data set and then I would probably go into like a Jupyter notebook or a Colab notebook, and I would try to mess around with it just to see, what is the simplest model that I can make to have some sort of okay-ish classification rate, right? And a few things that you could use in order to figure out how well your model is training. Like, it depends on how important to you false positives or false negatives are, right? And like more so than accuracy, like I think those are things that you should be looking at. And also I think that anyway, sorry, to get back to your original question, that's how I would start this. And then in order to deploy this, I'm actually not that familiar with deploying certain models, but I would assume that you use some sort of like GPU to accelerate the training. And then, this is during still the training phase, but maybe you're training a much larger model than the initial one that we came up with in our notebooks. Yeah. So you would use like GPU, some other resources to train it to accelerate that training process. You would parallelize. And then when you actually deploy it, I mean, everybody uses like cloud technology these days. So I feel like I would just deploy it to some cloud that serves the model, and every single time we have a new post, we can just filter it through, or not a new post, but maybe some new account that's flagged, or I don't know, something like that. We can just go through this model and say, oh, this might be a spam account.
Yeah. Would we want to do it a single post, or would we want to like, I guess I'm just trying to think about that detail. Is like, each post goes through this, or is there any other things that we might want to do here?
Well, so the way that we implemented this, it would be the specific accounts, right? So I do think that you would maybe wait for an account to have a few posts, but then Well, I think the tricky part is how do you catch a spam account before it posts any spam, right? And so the way that we've set this up, it's to kind of go through existing users and label them as spam or not. I do think it could be interesting for a future model to maybe assess the first post that an account makes and determine whether or not it's a spam post.
Yeah.
And then from there, if it determines that it's not and there's no way, like maybe these newer accounts should just be ones that you keep monitoring for a while and you keep reassessing, whereas older, I guess you can say legacy accounts might have more lenience, right?
Yeah.
Unless maybe a ton of people start flagging it.
Yeah. That.
But hopefully our other implementation would be able to catch that.
Yeah. I think that makes sense to me. Cool. I think that's all I have on this prompt. This was an enjoyable discussion. I think it's interesting to think about. I think there's a lot of different avenues you could go. So
right.
I know we're running up on time. I do want to just, I guess, quickly pause and just see if you have any questions for me before we kind of conclude this interview.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just wondering, what are your favorite and least favorite aspects of, your role as a data scientist at this company so far?
Yes, I think the big one is, I mentioned it at the start of the interview, is just the team. The team is really impressive. It's a diverse set of backgrounds, both people, PhD type people from Harvard, MIT, but also just some really, really brilliant, self-educated, kind of just learn this stuff on their own, bring a different perspective to the table, people that are on this team. So, from my perspective, one of my biggest goals, in this role is I want to continue to grow. I want to continue to develop, certain skills that I have. Like I come from a natural language processing background, I can apply those skills, but I don't have as much of that systems background. I don't know how to, deploy this on a production scale. So, what I enjoy, most I think about this role is just the opportunity to gain, those insights, just learn from people that have expertise and skill sets I don't, because I think that is helping me become a more well-rounded, member of the team. I guess on a separate note, like that's very much like team-based, but also there's just a lot of flexibility to move around in the role. Like I've kind of stepped into more of a managerial type role recently, whereas I very much was more of an individual contributor, writing code, on the front lines previously. So I like that too. On the flip side, I think what I enjoy least, this is, I guess, love-hate relationship, but, work here is a bit of a grind. Like we work hard hours. It's, to be classic and cliche, work hard, play hard. Yeah, work hard, play hard. That's the saying. So, I mean, it's, we put a lot of hours in. There's late nights sometimes. But I think with that, you do get that learning, but it's just like, sometimes it's a balance. It's like just making sure you know when to step back and reassess and just like not get too burnt out. So love-hate relationship on that side, but I think that overall I would take that over not being challenged.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And how long have you been working there so far?
I think this is my 5th year, so it's been a little while. So I've because I've had the ability to kind of switch around my role, I think I've stayed kind of engaged and I've just had opportunities to learn different stuff, and I think that's kind of what has helped me stay this long.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Because my follow-up question was going to be like, what opportunities for growth are there like within the company, and how does the company support that growth? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things. I think just in general, from being in a team environment where there's a lot of just driven people that want to know the latest, the state of the art. Like sometimes it just naturally kind of comes out during lunch discussions and whatnot. Some people are working remotely, some are at, the office. But, both channels, like, if I'm at the office, we go out and, some of this just the discussions just happen naturally, at lunch, or we sometimes host remote kind of like, Zoom lunches where we all kind of just hang out and chat about things. So that's like kind of an informal way. From a formal perspective, like we try to make sure that everyone that's here is happy. We have routine performance kind of check-ins and I don't say performance as in very strict, like if you don't meet certain bar you're out, but it's very much a constructive process where everyone on the team, no matter who you are, whether you're the CEO or if you're a junior engineer, like everyone has performance reviews. Someone on the team is tasked with evaluating and having that conversation, what you're doing well, what could be improved. So there's like constructive feedback across the board, and we try to do that either every quarter or every other quarter. Typically every quarter, we try to have something. Sometimes it's more formal, sometimes it's a little bit less formal, but everyone's critiquing everyone, no matter if you're the CEO or you're more junior.
Awesome. And then for my final question, just what would my first maybe 6 months kind of look like? What would be some of the projects that I'm working on look like?
Yeah. So, I think one of the most important things from my perspective for anyone joining the team is we don't want to have new team members be siloed. We want to make sure that they are exposed to what we have kind of out there on not just my team, but surrounding teams. So a couple of things that you'll be kind of doing is, first off, you'll be assigned immediately upon arriving a mentor that can kind of help guide you, and you'll specifically, this is a role for my team, so they would be kind of introducing you to our systems, walking you through the code base, introducing you to the other people on the team. So one of the big things is you have this mentor that's kind of there to guide you every step. But another important point is we try to make sure you get one-on-ones with everyone on the team within the first month, approximately, at least within our small team. So you get to meet everyone on the team, you get introduced to the code base. So it's really just kind of getting warmed up, getting comfortable, seeing things. Probably, end of month 1 to month 3, a big part of it will be, tackling some kind of more entry-level tickets on the systems, really get your hands dirty, plug in, and they won't be the most complex. You won't be designing a system from scratch, but taking our existing systems, ironing out some bugs, all of that, get more comfortable. After that, you'll be kind of more potentially not leading, but kind of help co-lead certain initiatives. And that has a little bit more flexibility. You can kind of take it different ways, whether you want to be really the one grinding out the code or you want to be more thinking about the design and all of that. And I think the only other thing is kind of throughout this process, we try to also introduce you to some of the teams that we work closely with. So you'll definitely have some interaction with them. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions.
Awesome. So I think next steps from here is there's going to be a software engineering interview. So that will test more of your Python skills, and then also likely will be a behavioral interview as well, where just gauge a little bit more of your career interest and all that. So next steps, you'll hear back with us in the next few days probably, and we'll go from there.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and nice meeting you, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
All right, end interview. I'm not Keith Galley anymore. I'm Keith Galley. You put me on the spot answering some of those questions at the end. I had to tap into my intro to acting skills to fill it. But honestly, I feel like I could answer it how I would answer it if I was in that situation and kind of from prior career experience. But yeah, I guess what were you saying?
Well, I feel like a critical part of interviews is asking questions to look engaged and genuinely interested in the role, right? So I didn't want to just be
no, that's fair. And the reason I asked that is because that is an important point. So I wasn't, I guess, preparing to be on my toes and getting ready to answer these. But I think it was good that you did ask those questions. And I think one thing that might be interesting is for you to evaluate kind of my breakdown of my responses and stuff and what you're looking for. Because I think one thing that I think about in these interview settings, and one thing I think is important to keep in mind, is I very much it's an interview for you, but I'm very much also like, you're interviewing me. And like, for me, when I was doing a lot of these interviews, like I definitely got stressed out when I was interviewing certain people that I knew were like high level. We really wanted to land this person. So I feel like keeping that in mind as an interviewee, that like, you know, this is not a one directional thing. Like I had nerves, you know, going into this, even though this is a mock interview, because like I wanted to ask the right questions. I wanted to get the conversation steered in the right way. And like, that's definitely how I felt in real world situations as well, where it's like, it's definitely both directions, especially if you really are looking to land a top candidate.
Yeah, so I definitely think that like overall, I mean, I enjoyed the interview. I thought it was pretty like conceptual, which is good. I don't like when a lot of it is just memorization.
Yeah.
And I think that in terms of the questions, well, okay, to be honest, I wasn't like 100% listening that much because it's not a real company.
Yeah.
But I do think that being like concise in your answer is probably something good to practice. So I do feel like you did talk about a lot of things where you could have just said, well, I think my favorite thing is this because I have a lot of flexibility and like I have a lot of growth opportunities, and that's really helped me propel my career. Whereas a negative is just that I feel like, you know, work is kind of a grind sometimes, but we're all here because we're really passionate about the product. And so like we're always like, we want this to work and succeed, and I want to be a part of that team. So like we work hard to make that happen. Just like being more concise with those responses. And I feel like, you know, when I ask these questions, it's a lot of times just me evaluating whether or not it's somewhere I'd want to work. Right.
Yeah.
So like if somebody does say like, oh, the work is a grind, then it might, like that is probably one thing that I'm prioritizing, is that like I want a work-life balance. Or so I guess like as an interviewer, something tricky that you could do is like before being like, oh, do you have any questions, to kind of get a feel for what they're looking for and then tailor your response to that. But also at the same time, I feel like then it's not very, like as an interviewee, I want people to be honest and genuine with their answers, right? Like I want to be able to evaluate for myself, like, oh, I'm going to expect to work 9 to 6 every day and then have the rest of my time. I'm going to expect maybe every once in a while to be on call, but not every night. And if then the reality is different from that, then I would be very disappointed, right? And I would want to leave. And so I think that those are things to think about, but I do think like honesty is the best policy.
This is interesting because in all the interviews I did, I never really got the chance to ask that type of question of like, you know, evaluate my own responses in trying to impress a candidate.
Well, I definitely think one thing is like, even when you're interviewing, I do think you like add a lot of fluff in things. So I think that, for example, when you ask me things like, oh, did you get the question? Like you didn't even ask a question. At that point, when you were like detailing the problem. And I think maybe just adding more breaks in between kind of your monologue in a way, like just being like, oh, does that make sense? To give the interviewer, you know, some more engagement, also a chance to ask questions is probably good. And I don't think you have to rephrase something multiple times. Like when you ask, what are some features that we should investigate regarding the bot issue? Just ask that. And then if they have any questions, they'll like ask specifics, right?
Yep, that makes sense. And I feel like I goofed there. I definitely, even in my notes, I kind of wanted to pause and just like see if you understood the like overall, I guess, like foundation of the it wasn't a question, that was the issue. I specifically didn't write question there, like the premise of like the context of the problem context. I guess that was it. There was no like question yet, but even though I wrote in my notes and I removed question and just did like problem context, I think I said it out loud again. So it's like good to know. I think it's good to know to not be too fluffy. I think I like doing that. So this is good insights from my perspective. I do want to just like, as part of the video, also like give you some feedback. I guess last question before I do that is like, I guess any other feedback on, I guess, the premise of the question and like just the flow of that type of interview?
No, I do think this was a very interesting interview because it's not straightforward, right? It's not like I can just mention the various features that I would put into a model. Like I do think that it required some time to think about. I do think it was very open-ended, and I think that's good in some ways because it forces me as the interviewee to ask for specifics, and you can tell a lot about a candidate by the questions that they do ask. And I also think that, for example, when I was trying to go through, what would this data set look like, or how would you approach collecting that data? Like, I do think that the one tricky part that I kind of faced was after I did this like naive labeling system, you're like, well, what is wrong with that? And in my head, I'm like, well, obviously you can do something more complex, but like, I think as a baseline, like there's nothing wrong with like what I said, right? Because it just depends on where you set that threshold. So I would actually, unless an interviewee is like blatantly wrong, I think from the perspective of an interviewee, like I'm also under stress, right? Like I don't want to I don't want to hear like, oh, that's wrong.
Yeah.
You didn't say it was like wrong, but you just said, oh, there might be some flaws with that. Like, can you think of anything? And so I tried my best to think of some things, but I do think that like, maybe if you had said, well, this, user feedback is really great, but can you think of anything specifically with like this specific part of that things might go wrong or something like that?
Yeah, I think the challenge is a balancing act. It's like on the one hand, I don't want to be leading. I don't want to like be like, hey, you could think about this specific thing. So I try to I think maybe I could be more positive instead of saying what's wrong, just saying, how can you improve this? And just leaving it at that.
I think that would also be good because I think when you said like there are some flaws here, it made me think like, oh, this system is just like, like I should just not be using like reports of spam. But like, I think that you genuinely should be using reports of spam if you're trying to label your data, right? So I think if you had asked like, oh, what's a way to improve upon the system, that would make me think, okay, I'm on the right track, but what are some flaws that I can think about there?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think just one note to add too, I think that from an interviewer's perspective, I think that that's the best approach what you mentioned. From your perspective, one thing that you could potentially employ, and whether or not you want to do this, it's kind of up to you. I've seen this before in real interviews that I've done, is like you're welcome to push back at that if you do it in like friendly is maybe not the way, but like in a professional way and say, actually, I think that this is a fine, like I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with this. I think this is a good baseline approach. We can improve it. Like you can kind of spin it that way too. Obviously with nerves and stuff, it's tough to do that. But like I've been at an interview where we kind of got into a debate, but in that I learned a lot about how they think, that they're willing to stand up for what they believe in. And like they weren't ever aggressive, but they were able to like stand their ground, argue their points, but being willing to listen to my side and like kind of we could come to an agreement. So whether or not you want to play into that, is up to you. Sometimes interviewers might be cruel and they might purposely get your nerves and be like, make you think you're doing something wrong, even though you're not. But it's an interesting, I think, from both sides, it's a chess match a bit there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, I don't have anything else.
Yeah, so from my perspective, just to add some details, I guess, I mean, overall, some high-level things. Like the reason that I would approach an interview like this is because if this is like a high-level position, I assume you know how to code. I assume that you know like the fundamentals, that you can program, that I'm not worried about that as much. I'm worried about how you are as a thinker, and not even like how you are as a thinker, but also how organized are you as a thinker. Because I could potentially interview someone that's very brilliant, but they might just kind of ramble on in a way that I can't follow. And I just even though I understand they know that they're talking about, I need to think about it in the context of a bigger team. And if they're not being straight to the point and like being able to flesh out in a way that's easy to follow their points, then that's not probably someone I want to work with, even if they're brilliant. So I think, some of my first comments is that I think you did a great job at not only explaining your points, but also being able to explain your points concisely. I think once you started having to write down the Google Doc, one thing I really appreciated and I don't always see is you were very cautious to format it nicely. which is a big thing for me as a reviewer. It's like a small detail, but I think it goes a long way, where it's like, it makes it easier for me to understand things. It makes it easier for me to follow up on certain points. So like structure there is good, solid like formatting and all of that. So like, yeah, all solid there. I think overall, like, I think a lot of just good discussion. I think you got to a lot of points without me even having to prod to that. It's like you kind of got to some of the like crux of like, oh, these are the features. I want to do build a feature vector of all this stuff. And like, I had specific questions hoping that you would get to feature vector and stuff, but you kind of just brought it up on your own, which was solid. I think it was a good use of like thinking out loud, like making sure that you're going through your thought process and like, saying what you're thinking as you're, writing it out as you're saying it. Like just, it allowed for more discussion, allowed me to see how you think.
Well, I definitely think that so because this is being put on YouTube, I definitely think that one thing to mention that like people who are kind of newer to tech interviewing and stuff like that, like I don't think it's common knowledge if you're new to this space to talk out loud during these interviews. Yeah. Like I think a lot of people just think, oh, they asked me this question, I just need to give the answer. No, like you need to like what they really want to know is how you think, right? Not whether or not you'll get to the right answer, because what an interviewer hopefully should be doing is, if you're going on a completely wrong path, kind of guide you to the like right answer, right? And I really enjoy interviews where it's more like a conversation, where I'm not just talking to myself, where I can bounce ideas back and forth, because that also shows me like this is what it would be like to work with this person on a team. So you really want to be able to display how you think and how you arrive at the answer, rather than just saying an answer and then justifying it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's great to to bring up. I think that it is kind of weird. It's kind of different and new. Same thing with like writing things down during an interview. Like we use Google Docs here, but like traditionally, if this was in person, like it'd be a whiteboard or something. And like, I think some people aren't prepared for that too. So like, knowing that this might be what you have to do, but I think, speaking out loud is super important. Let's see, what other notes do I have here? So some like small details, like overall, like from my perspective as an interviewer, like I thought you had a solid performance, like a good performance. Like I'd be excited as an interviewer to come out of that interview. Like this person hit the main bullet points that I had. So like, it would really come down to what do the other candidates look like, but like definitely, like, sometimes you come out of an interview, you just immediately know like this candidate was not right. Sometimes you come out of it and you're like, maybe. Like I definitely came out of this interview and I was like, yeah, that was a solid performance. Like this person knows what they're talking about. They think clearly. So like good from there. So like I'll be nitpicky on things because like overall good performance. One thing that you kind of did, and it ultimately was my next question, but like I would have liked, I think, a little bit more discussion when I brought up the data set. You kind of skipped to the model implementation. And so like, I didn't stop you, I didn't pause you, didn't bring you back because that was the next question, but just kind of keeping in mind what the question was at hand, whereas you ended up focusing on implementation, which was important, was the next question. But I think like, I would have liked to walk through that, I guess, in a specific manner. So small nuanced detail, like kind of annoying, me being annoying, but like, just something to consider, just to keep in mind, are you answering the question that was asked? Another detail, this is kind of at the end, and there is like little things that I'm like bringing up. It's not like a ton of, I think, things. One thing at the end, I think it was good that you mentioned like, hey, I don't have that much information, like knowledge in the system side of things. Like you shouldn't try to lie to your interviewer. Like I think it's really impressive when someone knows when to say, hey, I don't know that much about that. So like, I think it was good by like stating that explicitly and not trying to like, spin off some information on random cloud services that you actually don't know much about. Because I might ask you details about those and then you might be like, I have nothing. So it could catch you in a weird situation.
I do think that so the reason why I brought it up there was because you asked a specific question about the deployment of this, right? Like I would never have said it myself. Like, I don't know that much about this. But it was literally just because you asked this specific question that I did not know the answer to that I brought this up. And like, I don't think, like, I think that, at least to me, when I used to interview people, like, to me, it's it's okay if somebody doesn't know something, right?
Yeah.
Like what I want to see is that they're teachable and that they can learn and that they can think. So
yeah. And I think you bring up a good point though, because your point is I asked you about it and you said, I don't know much. You don't want to call attention to things that weren't brought up. You don't be like, oh, I'm actually like a junior engineer. Like I don't actually like know that much coding. Like don't bring up things. Yeah. I definitely see that sometimes in like interviews that I do. Bringing up things that they shouldn't bring up. Like be very confident and professional. Like know your stuff, fake it till you make it. And if they like bring up something specific that you know you can't talk that much about, be honest. But don't throw that out on your own. Like let them bring it up. So some things that could improve on that idea, I think that it was good mentioning of like, obviously we're going to probably want to use a GPU, probably going to want to like parallelize things. I think one thing that might have been interesting to say upon that type of answer, to dive into some of the more technical details, is I think that we would maybe just explicitly kind of mentioning like tokenizing maybe some of these tweets and whatnot, or whatever you want to pass into the system. But also I think a big thing that you could have brought up was like batching, and just explicitly mentioned like you probably don't want to take one tweet at a time, because that's going to like if we think about all of Twitter as a parallel to Twitter, obviously, there's so many tweets happening. There's so many potential bot accounts that if we were trying to handle these on an individual level, like it would just be in crazy and like intense processing. So we would need to like, maybe we have a window open for 5 seconds or something that like collects a big batch of these, and we have our model set up in such a way where it can process that full batch and spit out that output, and then we have to parse that output. So that would be like, I think one way to improve that, but I think it is on the deployment side of that is, maybe not your expertise, but I think the batching could have been something interesting to bring up. I'm trying to think of other specific components. I think the challenge is I like when I'm in an interview with two people where one person's writing the notes and one person's really leading the interview, because I think one thing that's challenging sometimes is writing those notes down as you're trying to listen. And let me see. I don't have too much like, I guess, specific like criticism that I wrote down. I might like review afterwards and provide additional things. Other like positive notes, for people listening in and whatnot. Like I appreciated when we talked about like, anything that is exciting to you. I appreciated that you kind of like didn't just go, oh, ChatGPT. You kind of like mentioned ChatGPT, because I feel like that's right now what I expect everyone to say. So it was nice to see some interest that was aside from that was unique and different. So like, you don't want to blend in with every other candidate. Even if you want to say something like ChatGPT, offer something unique and different that someone's going to remember you by. And I think that talking about reinforcement learning, talking about, superhuman chess AI, poker AI, spins up a more unique conversation. Other, I guess, potential thing that could have maybe improved things a bit, and maybe this was lack on my part of like, I called this a question, wasn't a question, so it wasn't super clear, but I think there were some other, problems with bots that you maybe could have brought up. I think you didn't add that much new details, and this wasn't a data science question. But from my perspective as an interviewer, I'm going to challenge your domain knowledge. So like if you're at a company, I expect you to know a bit about the company, right? So like some of the things I think that potentially, I think there could have been other, I guess, problems with bots that could have been brought up that were kind of specifically unique and different from things that I brought up. Like one thing you could have even mentioned is like, it might hurt our metrics. We might, if we have all these bots, like it's hard for us to report accurate metrics to people like advertisers that, might need these accurate metrics to, be able to budget properly. So that could cause us problems down the road. It's outside the box, it's different, but it might have been something interesting to bring up just to show you're really thinking about this. Other things like, bots, and this kind of came up with the following followers and who people follow. So it was kind of indirectly answered this, but like if bots are liking people's stuff really quickly on like, let's say there's a reply and maybe a bot didn't reply to it, maybe a human replied, but that human account had a bunch of bots that immediately liked it, it might give undeserved prominence to that reply tweet or whatnot as a bot issue. So, these are small things I'm poking at. but just interesting things, I guess, to improve further. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else.
Yeah, I don't have anything either.
All right, that's all we're going to cover in this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to throw this video a big thumbs up and also subscribe to not miss any future videos. If you have questions about the job interview process or have feedback on this video, make sure to leave a comment down below. Huge shout out to Kylie for joining and making this video possible. That's all I have for this video. As always, thank you for supporting the channel, and until next time,